Angelina Kelly, and yes, Manchester United have sacked their coach, Ruben Amry. So to react to this, I am joined by talkSPORT's Chief Football Correspondent, Alex Crook. Alex, thank you for joining me. We are both Manchester United fans, so it's only right that we have a chat about this. Amry met with Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada this morning, who told him that he was being relieved of his duties. Over the weekend, he hinted that promises have been broken, especially when it comes to transfers, as the club are planning a quiet January. Darren Fletcher will be taking charge on an interim basis. What can you tell us about this huge news?
Well, first and foremost, I think the club were always planning a quiet January. There was this scurrilous story doing the rounds on Friday night that they've been back in contact with Brighton regarding Carlos Baleba. Now, I spoke to Paul Barber, vice chairman at Brighton, at the Amex on Saturday before their game against Burnley, and he told me in no uncertain terms, we've not had any contact from Manchester United, nor would we want it. He's not for sale in this window. He said he's not for sale in any transfer window, but I think that may be tested in the summer. So I'm not sure where that story came from. There's been links with Conor Gallagher, but again, sources close to the England international ruled out the possibility of a move to Old Trafford in this window quite early on when I spoke to them. So for Ruben Amorim to claim via sources that he was told in November there would be significant investment in January, I'm just not sure that was ever the case. But clearly this is one of the final straws as far as the Manchester United manager is concerned. The former Manchester United manager, we should call him now, because he completely lost his mind in that press conference after they'd drawn 1-1 at Leeds. And I think the tension between him and Jason Wilcox, not just over the lack of signings in this window, but over the fact that I think Wilcox and the hierarchy wanted Amorim to be more tactically flexible, have led us to this situation. And as we saw with Enzo Moresca, when a manager comes out and publicly slates his paymasters, there is only going to be one winner. Myself and Ben Jacobs reported quite strongly on Sunday night that Ruben Amorim's job was very much in the balance, and United, I think by that time, had already made the decision they would go in a different direction. We know that Darren Fletcher will be the interim manager. He'll be in charge live on talkSPORT when United go to Burnley this midweek. He may well be in charge for the FA Cup game against Brighton as well. Who knows? We might be in a position where United are in this sort of holding pen and Fletcher steadies the ship until the end of the season when they look for a permanent successor. I think probably they will have somebody in mind before that, but let's see.
I mean, do we have any early indications for his replacement? We know that Enzo Moresca's without a job. Gareth Southgate has always been linked to Manchester United. You've got, someone like Xavi, for example.
Southgate was more of a Dan Ashworth idea, I think. And obviously one of the reasons that Dan Ashworth left the club was because he didn't necessarily agree with the appointment of Ruben Amorim, maybe felt the playing style wasn't suited to the Premier League, wasn't suited certainly to this Manchester United squad, or indeed the DNA of the football club. And that's a phrase that I've used with you on the Inside Devils podcast a few times. I don't think Amorim's style was ever really the right fit. Oliver Glasner is an interesting contender given what he's done at Palace, but he plays this back three as well. So if they're coming away from that, you'd have thought that probably would count against him. Enzo Moresca is somebody they've looked at in the past. He's got a connection with Wilcox and Barada, the chief executive from his time at Manchester City. And I do wonder, and this is sort of putting two and two together, but I think there's some science behind it as well. Why is Ruben Amorim chosen now to go to war with the hierarchy? Did he get wind of the fact that maybe they've already held talks with Moresca about potentially coming in? Why did Moresca walk away from Chelsea so willingly without a payoff? I really wouldn't rule that out.
Is that someone who you'd like to see in charge as a Man United fan?
I think he's done well at Chelsea. Obviously won a European trophy, which Ruben Amorim failed to do. And you'll remember the meltdown that I had in the mix zone after that game in Bilbao. I think there was a strong argument for firing Ruben Amorim then, because he got tactically outwitted by Ange Postecoglou. And ironically, it was the winning manager who ultimately paid the price with his job. Moresca has also won that Club World Cup. How much stock you put in that, I think, is open to interpretation. But he did get Chelsea into the Champions League last season. And he would argue actually he achieved all that in a very difficult environment where the hierarchy were telling him which players he should pick, which players he had to give minutes to and rotate the squad. The only worry, I guess, would be that he's already rallied against one model and one set of sporting directors and owners. So would that count against him as far as Messrs Wilcox and Barada are concerned? Is he experienced enough to go in and manage a club like Manchester United? Are you putting your faith in another rookie? I've got to say, I don't think the list of potential candidates is that stellar. I don't think there is a standout name. You mentioned Xavi. It's been a long time since he was managing one of the elite teams. So it's a conundrum. I don't think they've necessarily been planning for this, because I think this has come to a head as a direct result of the tension between the manager, Ruben Amorim, and the director of football, Jason Wilcox.
For me personally, I'm shocked. He must have really aggravated the powers that be with his comments over the weekend. It seems a little bit hasty because on the pitch, yes, things haven't been perfect, but United are sixth and they brought players in specifically for his system in the summer. But also, if you're Ruben Amry and you're giving a bit of back me or sack me play, you can't be shocked if it doesn't go your way. It did seem like he was coming towards the end, the way that he was talking in the press conference, even before the Leeds game. And then you've got the Kobbie Mainoo saga, the change of formation. It feels like, for me, maybe Ruben Amry never really managed to do what he wanted to do at United. And maybe we'll never actually know whether it was because he wasn't backed well enough, or whether the players weren't good enough, or whether, it was just Amrim himself that wasn't good enough. But I think it's sad. It's sad for Manchester United fans, because suddenly, once again, you're back at square one, you're back on the merry-go-round again, you're starting from scratch, and Manchester United again haven't been able to get it right post Sir Alex Ferguson, and to their rivals, they're once again a laughingstock. And I'm sure some Man United fans, if Enzo Moresca is the replacement, the fact that he was reportedly talking to Manchester City, I'm sure that'll wind a few people up. But again, you mentioned the hierarchy. Where does this leave them? Because we've had 2 seasons. Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada have now given contracts to 2 managers, sacked them both. Surely they have to be taking some criticism here. It's not just from fans and pundits, but from Sir Jim Ratcliffe too. Should their decision making around Ten Hag and Amrin be seriously scrutinised?
Yeah, because I think they kept Ten Hag in situ for too long. Gave him a new contract and then fired him. You've got the Dan Ashworth debacle, where we're told he's the best in class. They paid a lot of money to get him out of Newcastle, and he doesn't last longer than 5 minutes. And now you've got this Amorim situation. As I say, I think there was a strong case to relieve him of his duties at the end of last season. They didn't. They've spent money on the squad, largely on players that suit a certain system. And I would imagine whoever comes in next will tear that up and start again. So I think there's definitely scrutiny at the doors of Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada and Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But in terms of Amorim, if you're going to come out and say back me or sack me, then you need a few more wins under your belt. He lost. He failed to win more than half the games that he had in charge in all competitions, and that simply isn't good enough for a Manchester United manager. So I don't really see why he felt so emboldened to come out and do that. But I also think it's a poor reflection on Ineos that basically the straw that broke the camel's back for them was him coming out and publicly criticising them, rather than looking at his record, looking at the final in Bilbao, looking at being dumped out the League Cup by Grimsby, failing to beat 10-man Everton at home, not beating West Ham at home, not beating Wolves at home, which was an absolute disgrace of a performance. But actually, it's not about the performances so much. It's basically because of what he said in the press conference.
Yeah, it does seem it's quite sensitive souls, to put it lightly, if that's what's upset them. What does this mean for the transfer business of Manchester United? Because like you say, it was expected to be a quiet January anyway, but what will this mean moving forward? And also, were some of the transfers in the summer made by Wilcox rather than Amrim? Because I know that talkSPORT reported yesterday that Amrim preferred Ollie Watkins to Šeško last summer. So yeah, just the transfers in general.
Well, I think Kobbie Mainoo will be rejoicing, and I think now you know why.
I was going to say he's popping a bottle of champagne, Kobbie Mainoo.
Now you know why he only wanted to leave the club on loan, because as we said at the time, he felt like he could outlast the manager. I think actually that was the first sign of the cracks in the relationship from the hierarchy and Ruben Amorim, that they weren't willing to let Kobbie Mainoo go because they felt he still had a big future at Old Trafford. Clearly that wasn't going to be the case under Ruben Amorim. What happens with Marcus Rashford now? He's only on loan at Barcelona, and obviously that was a big conflict between player and manager. Could there be a scenario come the end of the season where actually he does have a future at Manchester United? In terms of this window, I think it's going to be very quiet. I don't think Mainoo will leave. I'm not convinced that Joshua Zirkzee will be allowed to leave, and I don't see any significant incoming. So I think in some ways this might give Ineos an excuse not to spend any money in this window.
Yeah, true. And I guess maybe, and I don't like saying this, especially as a Manchester United fan, but kind of like get towards the end of this season and then, perhaps take stock depending what they're going to do with the manager. And like you say, this throws so much up into the air, what it means about formations. Will Amad Diallo be going back to a winger? Who knows? Like you say, Kobbie Mainoo, and Marcus Rashford, even someone like Jadon Sancho, are they still considered lost causes? Is there a way back? I'm sure Marcus Rashford is enjoying life in Barcelona in the sun, avoiding the English media as best he can. But, it's Manchester United. It's the club that he has grown up loving and playing for. So if there is a manager that is willing to kind of take those players back into the fold and give them a bit of love, maybe like you say, there could be roads back. So I guess it's kind of a nervous time, but also exciting time. I guess we have to wait for the dust to settle as fans and, as journalists, I guess.
Yeah, but listen, this story is going to run and run. This is Manchester United, the biggest club in England, one of the biggest clubs in the world. And, this is going to fill all the back pages and all our airtime on talkSPORT, I would imagine, for several days, if not weeks to come. And, of course, they've got a couple of big games this week, which they've got to go to Burnley and win in order to maintain their push for a European place, which I know that the hierarchy there believe is within their grasp. And then they've got Brighton in the FA Cup at the weekend, which is a really tricky tie. But again, in terms of putting any silverware in the cabinet this season, that is the last chance saloon, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We've got Grimsby to thank for that. And just finally on the Manchester United side of things, what is next for Ruben Amry? Where do you see his stock? Because he was spoken about as the next big thing, the next big exciting young manager. Could we see him get another Premier League job? Do you think he's just kind of going to disappear off, into the horizon?
Well, I thought Jamie Carragher's comments that he wasn't really fit for purpose as a Premier League manager were a little bit harsh. There's a difference between...
I agree. Yeah.
There's a
I thought
between
it was too
managing
much.
West Ham, who obviously tried to sign him before, I think they hired Graham Potter, and managing the juggernaut that is Manchester United. I do think probably Ruben Amorim was too emotional at the end of the day to be the Manchester United manager, and obviously it was emotions in that press conference that led to his final demise. But yes, I do think Ruben Amorim has a lot to offer. And by the way, I've been critical of Ruben at times, as you have.
Yeah.
I've probably been more critical than you. But as a guy and dealing with us in the media, he was fantastic. I think genuinely he's a good guy. He's a good football man. I wish him all the success in the future. But this appointment just has not worked out. He wasn't cut out to be Manchester United. Yeah.
I completely agree, and I always liked the way, I think he has started to get a little bit too emotional in these press conferences, but at the beginning I really liked the way that he spoke. He always seemed to have quite a good demeanor about him, and so yeah, I get where you're coming from. In terms of post Fergie Man United managers, where would you rank him? It's hard because is it ultimately near the bottom considering United finished 15th last season, or is he a little bit higher because this guy was honest? He genuinely said, there's a storm coming, we need to try and change things, etc. It seemed like he understood the work that needed to be done. He did get to a Europa League final. Where I'm struggling to rank him.
I don't think he was as good as Erik ten Hag. Erik ten Hag delivered 2 trophies.
He did.
And Champions League football, beat Manchester City in that cup final, which probably is United's best day of the post-Fergie era.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's as bad as Wreck-It Ralph Rangnick. So
I don't think anyone's as bad as Ralph Rangnick.
Probably somewhere in between.
I'll take that. Somewhere between Ten Hag and Ralph Rangnick. He's just floating in the middle there. Well, there you have it. Alex, thank you for joining me. For more on this huge news, make sure that you are subscribed to the talkSPORT and talkSPORT Manchester United specific YouTube channels. You can find the latest news on our website, talksport.com. And don't forget, United's first game post Amrim, Burnley versus Manchester United, is live on talkSPORT on Wednesday evening.